So yeah, I'm going to be talking about the Rhinobathidae. I'm not an expert on this group, so this talk's largely just going to be sort of running through the basics. What are they? What are the threats? And what this CITES listing can potentially do for the group. So the Rhinobathidae are part of the Rhinopristiforms, which are probably one of the most threatened orders across all chondrichthyans. So rhinobatids are the guitarfishes, and they currently sit in one family. However, future genetic and morphometric work may see the pseudobatids eventually be classed as their own family. So there's been a varied amount of research and attention across the Rhinopristiforms. The giant guitarfishes and wedgefishes are highly threatened on the IUCN Red List, with 15 out of 16 of these species listed as critically endangered. They are also all listed on CITES Appendix II. Then the sawfishes are again highly endangered. These species are listed on Appendix I due to concern around the trade of their tooth rostra. Then down the bottom are the Trigonorhinidae, which are the banjo rays. So these have less conservation concerns, as many of them occur in parts of Australia where interactions with fisheries are limited. Which leaves us the rhinobatids. So these species are generally data poor, and unlike above groups, we don't have a global synthesis available on their conservation status, management, and threats. So there isn't a huge amount of easily accessed information on them. So for this reason, this talk is going to be quite quick and simple, though hopefully I'll be able to provide you with an introduction to the group, a brief overview of the threats they face, and why this proposed CITES Appendix II listing could be a positive step forward for the group. So we have 37 species in the rhinobatid family, and there has been quite a lot of recent taxonomic work on this group, and approximately 1/4 of the species have only been described in the past decade. So it's likely there are further species to be described. So these species are split across 3 genera. They range in size from quite small bodied, though some get to quite large sizes. And a key thing about this group is that they appear to be quite slow growing and have low fecundities, which means they are low productive species and their tolerance to fisheries mortality is low. And the rhinobatids are quite widespread across tropical and subtropical regions, covering 110 countries in total. So the pseudobatids occur around the Americas, while the Acroteriobatis and Rhinobatis occur throughout the Indo-West Pacific and Western Africa. And excuse my dodgy map here, there isn't really a holistic map with all the species, so I've just made this up the other night. So habitat-wise, most species only occur in relatively shallow water from the shoreline to a depth of about 100 meters. They inhabit mainly nearshore and inshore areas, including estuaries, enclosed bays, surf zone, in and around coral reefs, and mainly on soft substrates and benthic habitats covered in mud, sand, or rubble. There are a few deep sea species that get down to a couple of 100 meters, and it's likely there's more species to be described from these deeper habitats. Okay, so across the family, at the moment, 23 out of the 37 described species listed in a threatened category on the IUCN Red List, and an increasing number of species being listed in high risk categories. So what this means is that we've seen declines of at least 50% over the past 3 generation times for most rhinobatid species. And these threatened species largely occur throughout most of the family's range. So it's only really Oceania where populations are in good shape. Sorry, I was meant to bring that up earlier. Okay, and given most species live in shallow waters, they're exposed to high levels of fishing pressure. And an issue for this group is that much of the diversity occurs in global fishing hotspots, which is why the family as a whole is under increasing pressure. Many of the countries these species occur in are also those which commonly use and trade shark and ray products, and they also typically lack fisheries management frameworks. So it's unlikely that rhinobatids constitute a large portion of any particular fishery. However, when caught, they may be a source of high value relative to other catch. And we don't have a great deal of information on specific volumes, values, and trade routes, though we know that they are present in international markets, and it is clear that populations are declining as a result of fisheries capture. So all in all, the risks for ongoing and future population declines for this family are quite high, and this appears to be driven by a combination of local consumption and international trade demand for fin, meat, and their skins. So I've taken this table out of the proposal document, which outlines the top nations landing rhinobattids. However, as I said, we know that the species resolution is quite poor for this group. So I'd take this table with a pinch of salt, so to speak. All this table does is highlight that the northern Indian Ocean, including the Gulf and the west coast of Africa, are some of the high concern areas for this family. And these are two regions that contribute substantially to the international trade of shark and ray products. So the present proposal is to list 6 critically endangered species in the CITES Appendix II. And this proposal is being made by Israel, Kenya, Panama, and Senegal. In addition to this, it is proposed that all species in the Rhinobattidae family are listed as lookalikes, which would grant international trade protection to all species in the family. So for the most part, these species are very difficult to distinguish in the field due to their similar shapes and body sizes. They also have remarkably similar looking fins. So a large reason for the paucity of information on species in this family is that they are very rarely reported to species level in fisheries data. And this has limited our understanding of species diversity, status, and trade. And there are also risks that these species may be misidentified as juveniles of members of the giant guitarfish family. And the identification challenge for this group are highly pronounced when it comes to trying to identify a species composition in the trade of dried and processed parts. However, identification of the family as a whole within trade products is likely to be possible. So the Appendix II listing of all species will not stop legal trade in these species, but the key positive is that it will enable collection of better trade data and should help ensure that legal international trade is not detrimental to the survival of these species and their populations. So the present CITES listing proposal is not necessarily designed to slam the door shut on Rhinobattidae trade, though it will likely facilitate much needed improvement in fisheries and trade data feedback so that we can better understand the magnitude of trade in the key source countries. Ultimately, this will lead to a concerted conservation capacity. Ultimately, this will need concerted conservation and capacity building efforts in such countries. So the international stakeholder recommendations on the proposal were a bit varied. So firstly, the FAO expert panel found that there was insufficient evidence that Rhinobattidae are present in the international trade to a level indicating that international trade is a major driver of population decline. They did note, however, that there is a paucity of data available. The FAO panel did consider that population declines observed for Rhinobattis rhinobattis would meet criteria relating to population decline. So though overall, the FAO did not consider the proposal to meet criteria for CITES II. And this is likely to be a symptom of the absence of solid trade data. So next, the IUCN traffic analysis of the proposal found that the observed population declines meet the relevant criteria for 5 species. And they also identified that due to the high risk of misidentification within the family and potential for misidentification with other listed specimens from Rhinidae, Glaucostidae, and Pristidae, that they meet criteria A in Annex 2B, which essentially means that their inclusion in Appendix 2 will improve control of other CITES listed species. So overall, the IUCN traffic assessment indicates that the Rhinidae proposal would meet criteria for the Appendix 2 listing. Then finally, the CITES Secretariat findings largely corresponded to the IUCN traffic analysis. And the final recommendation was that the proposal does meet the criteria for Appendix 2 and should be adopted. However, the CITES Secretariat note this recommendation is largely precautionary, as the available data on the magnitude of international trade is unclear. So just a quick snapshot of sort of the more direct implications in the Pacific and around Australia and Oceania. So we only have two species at the moment within this family, and both of these are listed as least concern on the IUCN Red List. Rhinobatus mannii was only, I think it was described in 2019, and this is sort of a deep water species that doesn't appear to be affected by fisheries too much. And then the other species in northwestern Australia, again, is in quite a well-protected area of Australia, and there's not a great deal of fishing pressure affecting that one either. Okay, so just to sort of summarize that, so Rhinobatidae, we've got 3 genera and 37 species, with most of which have broad tropical and subtropical distributions. And they generally have life history traits that indicate low productivity. So more than half the species are threatened on the IUCN Red List, and most of them occur in regions with high unmanaged fisheries pressure. And we know that their uses do include international trades of fin, skins, and meat. So we currently have limited fisheries and trade protections throughout the range of these species. And that's partly owing to the morphological similarities, which make it really difficult to tell these species apart. So in summary, the Appendix II listing aims to facilitate better fisheries trade data and ensure that international trade is not detrimental to these species' persistence. It also appears that the listing of Rhinobatidae would be complementary to other listed rhinocristiform species. So that's all I've got. Thanks again to Lawrence and HSI for putting on the event today, and I'm happy to take any questions.